Hi Class 4, here is the rest of Chapter 4 of Stig of the Dump, Gone a-Hunting. Fox, he hissed. That's it, Stig. It really is a fox. He levelled his hunting spear at the fox and wished he had the bow and arrows, but perhaps he could spear it. Stig, he breathed. Come on, now's your chance. But this time Stig did not raise his bow. Instead, he took hold of the end of Barney's spear and held it so that he could not throw it. The fox strolled calmly up to their feet, gave Stig a glance, and vanished down the hole. Barney nearly burst into tears of rage. But Stig, why did you let him go? He stormed. You're supposed to kill foxes. That's what hunting's for. That's why we came. But Stig grinned in a rather superior way. He pointed down the hole after the fox, acted a little pantomime as if he was eating, and screwed up his face as if he was tasting a bad taste. He made it quite clear that he thought Barney was mistaken in wanting to kill something he couldn't eat. The scufflings in the undergrowth seemed to be just on the other side of a bramble patch on the edge of the track. Quick, Stig, they're coming, exclaimed Barney. Get back into our hiding place. And he pulled Stig back into the mouth of the earth. And he did so. As he did so, a large foxhound came out onto the track and lolloped towards him on the scent of the fox. It came straight for where they were hiding, looked up and saw Stig, and bared its teeth and growled. Stig bared his teeth and growled. You can just see there the hound there. Right up to the hole, you can just see Stig in his hiding place. The hound looked surprised. It wasn't sure whether Stig was animal or human, but he was certainly lying between it and a good strong scent. The hound took a step forward, making horrible noises in his throat. Stig took a step forward on his hands and knees, making horrible noises in his throat. Barney sat at the back of the little cave, holding his middle. The hound looked very big and fierce, and he was afraid it might hurt Stig, but then Stig was looking very fierce too, and he might hurt the hound. Stig was the first to move. With a lightning spring, he darted forward and bit the hound hard on the ear. It was too much for the poor animal. It was not afraid of sharp-toothed foxes or other animals that fought back, but Stig smelt like a man, and it had never heard of a man biting a dog. It turned and made off yelping, with its tail between its legs. Barney looked at Stig. I think we'd better go home, he said. We're supposed to be fox hunting. And what have you done? Killed a pheasant, helped a fox, and bitten a hound. What are you going to do next, I'd like to know? But once again, Stig was not listening to Barney. He was hearing something new. The thud and squelch of heavy hooves moving through the woodland glades. And perhaps he was smelling another animal's smell. The horses of the hunt followers were moving through the wood, and now at last Stig's face was alight with the excitement of the hunt. Without a sound or a look to Barney, he slipped into the undergrowth and started flicking from thicket to thicket and tree trunk to tree trunk towards the sound of the horses. An arrow already strung in his bow and held with his left thumb. Barney followed as best he could through the undergrowth, with a feeling that something had gone badly wrong with his hunting trip, and that far something worse was going to happen at any moment. Stig seemed to pass through the banks of the bramble without feeling or caring for scratches, but Barney's mackintosh was always getting caught and ripped, and low branches snatched his hat off, and his rubber boots did not save his knees from scratches. And the more he tried to keep up with Stig, the hotter and crosser he was getting. When he came to an open space at last and saw Stig and saw what he was doing, all he could do was cover his face with his hands and moan softly to himself. Oh no, 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 no. Standing in the track where the huntsman had left to go into a thicket on foot was the huntsman's white horse. Hiding behind a mossy stump, his eyes blazing with excitement, his bow bent to the full, with an arrow pointing straight at the white horse, was Stig. Stig was really hunting now, and to him, horses were meat. And you just see him there. There's the white horse, Barney looking on in shock, and Stig with his arrow about to try and spear the horse. Lou sat on her pony at the edge of the wood. On one side of the black trunks of the trees dripped sadly, and the wind moaned in the branches. On the other side, low ragged clouds swept over the bare stubble fields. Around her were various ladies, gentlemen and children of the hunt, on board of fidgety horses, waiting around for something to come out of the wood. They had waited by a field of cabbages and found nothing. They'd waited by a field of turnips and seen a hare, and they'd jogged along lanes and tracks and waited by copses, but they still hadn't found a fox. Lou's cheeks were glowing, and so was her nose. Her eyes were sparkling, her hair hung down in wet strips, and her numb fingers could hardly feel the reins. Flash, the pony, who in his younger days at least used to live up to his name, stood in a puddle with his head lowered and blew steam from his nostrils into the damp air. "First time out with the hounds, young lady?" asked a hearty lady on a big black mare. Lou smiled and nodded, and a little shower of drips fell from the peak of her cap. "Enjoying yourself?" asked the lady. "Yes, thank you, super," replied Lou. All the same, she thought if only she'd let me go into the woods and poke about a bit, I'm sure I could find a fox. There must be something going on in there. At that moment, out of the woods came the shrill neighing of an outraged horse. All the waiting horses pricked up their ears, riders nervously shortened their reins. There seemed to be a sort of commotion among the riders who had gone some way into the wood. Horses were backing, rearing, turning in spite of their riders, snorting and neighing. And into the thick of them plunged the huntsman's white horse, riderless, eyes rolling and nostrils wide with alarm, cannoning into horses and riders and sending them sprawling in puddles and mud. It was a stampede. As the huntsman's horse bolted through the middle of them all, the other horses whipped round and joined it in a mad flight. Most of the riders were caught off balance. Some lost their hats, some lost their reins or stirrups, some lost their seats straight away and were left on the edge of the stubble. Some of them, who had been round the corner of the wood, thought the fox had gone away and urged their horses after the rest of the field. All Lou could do was stay on top of Flash as best she could and join the stampede. So this was hunting, she thought. Though thinking was difficult at a full gallop in the middle of a lot of other excited animals. Yet even then she had a feeling that there was something queer. Why wasn't the huntsman on his horse? And had she imagined it, or had she seen, sticking into the saddle of the bolting horse, something that looked like an arrow? And Lou was never quite sure whether or not she had seen out of the corner of her eye, at the tail of the hunt, a very odd creature indeed, come whopping out of the wood. Had it been naked and mud-splattered? Did it have hair like a tangled bramble bush? Did it have rabbit skins round its middle and a sort of tail of feathers behind? And could it have been brandishing a bow and arrow? No. If one was old enough to go hunting, one was really too old to believe in goblins and things. She must have imagined it. The hunt eventually scattered itself in all directions over the countryside. Riders at last reined in their blown horses and found themselves alone or in small groups in remote stackyards. They'd decided they'd had a good day's sport and went home. Nobody was quite sure what happened to the hounds, or the fox, but it had been a good run. Lou, after directing quite a few lost people, got back to her grandmother's house as the evening was beginning to close in. Barney got back only a little earlier. They both needed baths and they were both very hungry by the time they sat down to tea in front of a blazing log fire. "Well," said grandmother, "so you went off hunting after all, Barney?" "Oh, not really hunting like me," said Lou scornfully. "Well, no," said Barney. "I went with Stig, see, and he was only interested in hunting squirrels and pigeons and pheasants, really." "That's not hunting," said Lou. "In England it's only hunting if it's foxes or stags." "Well, Stig doesn't hunt foxes because they taste nasty, so we let the fox go. But it was so near, I could touch it." Lou's eyes and mouth were round with disbelief. It was Lou, really. And then Stig bit the dog and started hunting the horses. It was jolly funny. Barney chuckled, but I thought I'd better come home. Lou looked at Barney very hard, but for once she didn't say anything. And then that is the end of chapter 4. So tomorrow we are on to chapter 5. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. See you later.